All right. Looks like we have everyone. Well, nice to meet Jason and Jason today. To make it easy, Jason Grob is going to go by Jay today. But for introductions, my name is Jack McGlinchey, co-founder and CEO of Sonar. Sonar helps operations teams manage their broader GTM tech stack, ensuring that as they update processes or changes, they're able to do so effectively. As I mentioned, we have Jason Dorfman joining us today, and I'll let him introduce himself.
All right. Hi, I'm Jason Dorfman. I'm the CEO of Orem. We're building an AI live conversation platform to help empower sales reps and make them more successful over the phone. Excited to be here.
And great to meet everyone as well. I'm Jason Grob, co-founder and CEO of Tailor. Tailor is a demo automation platform for marketing and sales teams to help scale those self-serve demos really across the revenue funnel.
Wonderful. Well, thank you both for today. Really excited about today's topic. I think today more than ever, this topic is very timely. With the introduction of AI across go-to-market tech, people feeling like they have a human connection is becoming even more important than ever. And so for today, we really want to dive into personalization. It's really the thing that can set businesses apart from experiences they might be getting from other vendors or just other relationships. And I really want to dive in today around how we can leverage technology in order to create personalized experiences for our customers, both pre-sales and post-sales. And Jason, Jay, just to start things off, really curious what technologies have been most influential in enabling companies and organizations to leverage personalization, especially when we think about doing so at scale.
Yeah, I think there's obviously a lot of platforms out there that are really touting personalization these days. When I was thinking about this before we hopped on, I think a lot of call recording softwares, I think we're really early on in terms of helping people extract a lot of the information from those calls to help personalize follow-ups. Obviously, like Gong leading the way here in a lot of ways. A lot of email AI tools, right? Like whether it's all the things built on top of ChatGPT, you've got Lavender, Reggie. I think those have really led the way. And then you obviously have SalesLoft with Rhythm. And the relatively recent acquisition of Drift. Like I think there's a lot of tools that are going to be thinking about how can they personalize at scale. And I think a lot of it is connecting the different parts of the business all the way from marketing through sales and through customer success. And how can you really build those touch points along the way?
Yeah. Jason, what are your thoughts?
Agree with Jay. I mean, it's definitely been an evolution. When I was a SDR in 2010 and you're making calls, you're manually logging all of those in Salesforce, updating the status. And so you have quite a bit of time between each touch point to do a bunch of pre-call research, which can be a good or a bad thing depending on the context. Now pickup rates are a lot lower, response rates are a lot lower. It creates a bit of a dilemma. And there's a lot of tools that have come in the fray to try and help with this. I mean, there's everything from like AI deepfake videos to do, customization at scale that way. But one of the things that I really like about the phone is it allows you to do personality at scale. So my feeling, and I guess maybe I'll disagree with the premise a little bit, sometimes customization and personalization is important, but I think especially when you're at least reaching out to someone, a lot of it has to do with getting to the point, having really good fundamental sales skills and the subtle way in which you say things versus going and doing a bunch of pre-call research before every call. But obviously all the email tools out there, they have variable swapping, things like that to make this a lot easier. But I also think when people get messages, particularly over email, they almost automatically assume that it's not written by a human and not really personalized to them, because I think part of the reason people would react to personalization back in the old days is they said, well, at least this person did the work to research me. And now that they know a lot of that's automated, I don't think it has the same effect. So I think everyone's trying to figure this out a little bit.
That's a really great point. It's sort of like a back to the basics moment for sales and go-to-market, where we got so caught up in technology and deploying these things at scale that we forgot about the the underlying fundamentals and really use them as a crutch. Jay, curious, on the, your focus is much more on the website and the marketing side.
Mm-hmm.
What's your reaction to Jason's take there?
Yeah, I think I completely agree. I think the word personalization is used. I think it's a lot of times like it's a feature that's baked in that says, oh yeah, well, you can personalize with our tool, but what does that really mean? Is that really going to add value? Because I agree. I think we've kind of hit the point where if you say in an email to me, hi, Jason, I know you went to the University of Maryland. Like, I know that is something that just scraped my LinkedIn profile, and that is not someone that actually went and did the research on me. So that kind of loses value because I immediately block it out. I do think there's like the visitor identification space though has really gotten really, really popular in the last month or like really year or two, especially in this cookieless world that we're approaching. So how can you think about personalizing at the top of the funnel? Like I know we personally use Warmly, which uses 6sense and Clearbit data to basically like really help you understand who is on your website. And all the different ways you can go about that. But at the same time, it's how do you use that data? How do I know if a specific company is on Toriel's website, for example, that I can then make that follow-up more personalized to them without just saying, hey, Bob, saw you were on our website. Like that's not necessarily going to add a lot of value.
Yeah, totally agree. One of the things I'm personally very curious about is it's always been a balance in my career is thinking about how to balance the personalization aspect versus getting it wrong. Like a lot of these technologies aren't perfect. The underlying data isn't perfect. We have customers that I've talked to that put landmines in their LinkedIn profiles. So if you message them the wrong way, they automatically know it's scraped or incorrect. How have you thought about, especially as people that build technology, managing that balance?
Yeah, I can go first. I think LinkedIn is still a very relevant tool because you can personalize your own profile. And the more that you fill that out, the richer that is. When you reach out to someone, it's not like email. They have some color on who you are, and you can draw different connections between both you and them. I think as far as like the phone's concerned and live conversation, like we have some interesting tricks that we use. Like one, I totally agree with what Jay's saying that like if you reach out to me and you say, hey, I saw you went to UCSB, or I saw that X, Y, and Z, I almost know that that's something that was automated, and therefore like the effect of personalization doesn't count for much. But I think that subtleties in which you say things. So like if I reach out to someone, I say, hey, Jay, I know you're leading the team over at Toriel. That's a lot different than, hey, Jason, I saw that you are the co-founder and CEO at Toriel. So I think things like that, some of the subtleties in your sales messaging can go a long way, because what prospects really want to know, more so than did you do a bunch of homework and look at their Twitter from 5 years ago, is that did you need to get a hold of them specifically, or were you just going through random leads and unlucky you're the next one on my list? So I think as long as you can subtly communicate that you're trying to reach out to them specifically, that they're the target of your outreach, you can do that in a lot of different ways outside of just digging up their web history, for example. I think that gets you 90% of the way there. Of course, in managing a sales campaign, that's a little bit different. Like your demos, you should be doing your homework before those. You should be tailoring those. You should be doing discovery. And then obviously later on the sales campaign, you have a lot more context. And that comes down to listening and the information that the prospects and other people in the account have given you in order to help reach their goals.
Yeah, I would say really an approach that we take at Toriel is a focus on zero-party data, which if you're not familiar is really data that's being volunteered by the specific visitor or prospect. They're saying, I'm interested in this. And if you can get them to participate with you, and that could be on LinkedIn, it could be on your website, right? Anywhere that you're potentially engaging with your prospects, it could be at a live event. But once they've started to volunteer that data, they're actually part of the process of really personalizing the buyer journey with you. I think that's really something we focus on a lot here at Toriel, is how do we understand what they really care about and tell us what you really care about, And then that journey feels a lot more seamless and natural, and it doesn't feel like this kind of forced mechanism of personalization to get them to try to talk to you.
Yeah, well said. Jason, as you were mentioning a lot of these different things around being, super intentional about research and just being more human with these interactions, that can be really difficult while you're trying to do this with some level of scale. For maybe the sales leaders that are listening in today, what advice might you give them in balancing that personalization, but also maybe the scale and the numbers that they're responsible for hitting?
Yeah, I think the personalization can go wrong in a couple different ways. Like one, as we mentioned, is half-hearted. Like you're looking up some, unrelevant information about them as a hook that's not really relevant to the value that you're bringing up. And then the other downfall is that sales reps may use personalization as an excuse not to put up the activity needed to really get to their goals, because speed does matter when your pickup rates or your response rates are fairly low, because we're in a really noisy market. I would say one thing that folks on our team are really big about is that if you're going to do research on a prospect for cold outreach, you should do that once, not at every single touch point. So like one of the things we allow you to do at Orem is you can write the first email in a customized manner with all the research that you want, but then we pull that email in, and then for all your touch points after that, you have that whatever relevant information is there as a reference point. Sometimes you'll see, someone will have 15 or 20 touch points in a campaign, and they feel that before each one, they need to go dig up things on Twitter, look at the person's LinkedIn for 15 minutes. And I think that's the other area where it goes wrong, because they said, hey, like the rep goes, hey, you want me to customize these things, you want me to personalize this. And then they end up not putting up the activity that's actually needed to get a hold of an interested party, because part of the trick is like there's people that are believers, there's people that are not believers, and your goal is to find the believers. And sometimes that means that you're better off moving quickly than moving slowly, because if you are bringing value and you're pitching this in the right way and you're listening and you have personality, then that person that's interested, they're going to talk to you anyways.
Yeah, poignant. So Jay, on your side, how do you think about personalization and whether or not it's working? I think with a website, right, like you have inherent scale to just the sheer number of visitors that are coming to the website. But what do you tell your customers in terms of thinking about how, whether or not it's working and if it's working well?
I think it's the level of engagement that you see, right? When you kind of have bad personalization, you see people are not going to respond, whether they're not going to reply to an email, engage with you, wherever it might be. Like I know, like when we launched our first version of like an AI chatbot on our website, it wasn't great, and you could kind of see through it right away, right? Like we kind of had to stumble a little bit and make those mistakes. So I think like kind of practicing what we preach here at Toriel, it's like, how do you make sure that people are engaging? When they are engaging, then that human element can kind of jump in, right? When you feel that element, like that's where you really need to make sure you're focusing your time and attention.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I definitely think we've all stumbled during some personalization efforts. So
yeah,
I think that's well said. Well, on that point, Jason, curious, when you talk to sales teams, how do you encourage them to utilize customer data or maybe data coming from some external sources without coming off as creepy or compromising privacy? Like you said, going back 5 years of web activity can sometimes be a little abrasive. How do you think about managing that privacy aspect of it?
Yeah, so I mean, if you're digging up information on someone, the idea is that whatever information you're digging up should be relevant to the value that you're bringing, not some factoid in a blog that they wrote 10 years ago that has nothing to do with what you're selling. I'd say that one of the arts that's truly been lost in sales development in particular is like this idea of singles and doubles. I'll sort of explain what that is, but there's so much automation these days. Like we look at it, every touch point as this individual thing. At my previous company, like one of the accounts I broke into was AIG, and they had something like 400 or 500 people with IT titles. So there's no idea to know like who is the right person and Obviously you get ignored by the bulk majority of them. And so what it took was calling a bunch of people in that company, understanding how the company works, understanding who is in charge of what. Maybe they're not taking a meeting with me, but I'm using the information from talking to people within that account. So that way, when I figure out who the right person is for my initiative, I can use that personalized info. Like, people are going to open up an email if they see their colleague's name in it, especially if it's referencing a relevant, timely conversation with them. So I think what happens with SDRs these days is they're going through the motions. They're like, oh, next step onto the sequence, next call. And they look at everything as this mutually independent step. But I think sometimes reps need to just slow down and really think about that strategically. And like, the best information you can reach out with is something that's relevant, that's timely, that's coming from their colleagues. And when I say singles and doubles, that means like, you might make a call or have a touch point. You may not get the meeting, but you're getting information that can help you build up the case for why they should engage with you in a sales campaign. So I think that's the most relevant data, especially now, as we've mentioned a few times, that looking up personal factoids or where they went to church or where they went to school, like, occasionally it might grab their attention, but it's not really selling on value in any way.
I think it's a really fair point. Jay, on the website side, or at least on the MarTech side, generally, obviously there's a lot more privacy concerns, and you sort of brought up this zero-party data. But as you think about the different kinds of data available to you and your team, and how marketing teams are leveraging those, what sort of recommendations are you making to make sure that privacy is maintained?
Yeah, I think it's pretty honestly, Google is going to enforce this a little bit with this cookieless world that we're moving into, right? Where it's going to be a lot harder to track folks across websites. And I think that's really changing the game, where I think it's actually going to merge a bit more with sales, and it's going to be thinking about it more from that same relevance element that Jason was just mentioning, is how can you engage with people wherever they are. I think timing is a really big factor for that too. I think that the best outreach, the best engagement I have is where it feels like that sales rep was in the room with me. Like, how did you know that I was talking with this person? How did you know that I had this exact problem 3 hours earlier that I was talking with our team about? And I think a lot of that gets back to understanding the size of the business, the stage of the business, the problems that you don't know that they're having those problems, but you can probably guess that they're having a range of problems just based off of where they're at, how much money they've raised. There's a lot of touch points that you can see externally that don't tell you the story in and of themselves. So if you focus on any of those touch points, like, how much money has Twirl raised? Like, great, you can look that up, right? But how does that really affect, okay, how are we scaling? Who are we scaling into? Who do we sell to based off of the logos that you can see on our website? All of those things are very much readily available for teams to take advantage of. You just have to tell the right story. And obviously in MarTech, storytelling is the name of the game. And I think it's, how do you tell a great story to your prospect wherever they find you?
Yeah, conceptually, I think that's spot on. So Jason, this is definitely going to be a selfish question, but as you think about talking to the different SDR teams that you might work with, or even the account executives, I think going back to these fundamentals that we talked about, and being just really good sellers, and being timely and authentic and personalized without using data as a crutch necessarily. It sounds like enablement and training here is a really big part of this. What sort of weight do you put on that in terms of being able to train SDRs to have these more sophisticated conversations versus following a script with variables inserted? What's been your experience there?
Yeah, and I'll just say that the script versus no script thing is kind of controversial, and I think scripts are like good learning tools, but I think the problem is, like, it should never be a replacement for the rep being able to think on their feet, having fundamental sales skills, and more importantly, know their product. What is more helpful, knowing where they went to college, or when I ask you what your product actually does, how it's different than the competitors, what's special about it? Like, do you have a really, really good answer for that? I think you're better off spending your time learning about the value of your technology, or to build off what Jay was saying, like, what do Series A CEOs or VPs in their particular situations, what are the common challenges that almost all of them are facing right now, and how does that relate to your product? I think that's going to be a much more relevant message. So I would say, like if there's one thing I want to change about sales development, and I kind of experienced this. I mentioned this on another podcast recently, but when I was at Rubrik, I said when I started the SDR team there, I was like, I'm going to go hire SDRs who have spent a couple years at some of our competitors or some of these adjacent companies. And I interviewed them, and I did a little bit of research on their product beforehand, just scanning the website. And I would ask them like, so tell me about like your technology, like what does it do? And like, I knew more from like looking at the website for 20 minutes than they did working at the company for 2 years. And I ended up hiring mostly entry-level people and training them myself. Another thing that we're doing at Orem that I also learned at Rubrik is when we hire new SDRs, we have them do a pitch contest, not when they're about to graduate into being an AE, but like the first month. Because what happens after that first month is either like they bomb and you're not hearing them complain about becoming an AE because they know they have a lot of work to do before running a discovery call, or they knock it out of the park and the AE leaders are going, hey, I want this person on my team. And then they're bugging you, over the next few months, and they have a promotional path. But what it does is it causes them to really study this stuff and go, okay, like if I have to do the full extended pitch, if I have to run a mock discovery call, I have to know these things inside and out. And that's going to help your outreach because you're going to understand what the product actually does, how it actually helps people. Because I think that's where you get the eye roll when you have cold outreach. Is like this person reaching out to me just like doesn't really know anything about my space, doesn't really know anything about my position. So I think a lot can be gained by becoming technical, knowing the product, knowing the space. That's how you're going to sound personalized. I think that's maybe the thing that's most overlooked. But I'll get off my soapbox.
No, I think it's perfect. Do you, just as a follow-up, do you think this changes the, maybe the traditional role and background that sales development has traditionally taken, or do you think it maybe puts more of an emphasis on the things that we've always known to be true? It's pretty open-ended, but curious if that sparks anything for you.
Yeah, I think it's what, Jack, what you said at the beginning of the call. I think it's a little bit of back to basics. Like we have awesome tools here. Like we can use AI to automate a lot of the drudgery that's associated with sales. But I think at the end of the day, like we have to look at SDRs in particular as junior sales reps, and we need to train them to have those fundamental skills and have the empathy and to actually be helpful for the person that they're talking to. So I think that's the thing that's most overlooked.
Yeah,
something we're definitely seeing something similar, I think, too, with demos and tours and these self-guided demos, almost competing with SDRs, all of it now, right? Where it's like if someone can take a 2 to 3 minute interactive demo of a product and get the gist of what that product does, it honestly raises a great awareness. It's also very controllable, right? Because it's a 2 or 3 minute tour. It's already pre-built. So it's how do you kind of think about that dynamic between leveraging more of that self-serve model across the internet, even in all your outreach, but also arming your SDR team with that too. So they potentially don't have to think through some of those, call it like the canned demo talk track script. And they can really focus on what matters around the prospect. And really, because obviously a lot of SDRs, it's an entry-level role. They've got enough on their plate. How can you make that job easier for them?
Yeah, well said. All right, completely switching gears here. We spent a lot of time talking about sort of that sales process. How do you think the customer experience in the post-sales process impacts, maybe what we're having to deal with on the sales and the new business side? Anything from feedback loops or leveraging customer data. Happy to keep it open-ended, but curious how you think about that customer experience impacting, personalization broadly. Jay, I'll let you go first this time.
I'm trying to think through. I think there's obviously there's so many data points within the application that you can draw from, and it's what are the there's a lot of applications that are great at understanding, well, what are the happy paths within the app to make sure that I'm going to have really successful customers. So obviously I think there's an element of personalization at the like individual account level that you can look at, and understanding how an individual account is successful, and success is different for every single account. But also at the aggregate level. So how can you pull all of those data points across your entire install base, and use that to build more personalized, maybe it's an outbound motion. Hey, we know we're really sticky with this specific persona, this specific type of user. How can I aggregate a lot of that data to then build those personalized campaigns? And those campaigns might be in the application to drive adoption, but I think it's actually pulling them up even further. I think the hardest customer is like a customer that isn't successful right at the start, and you're trying to turn them around. But if you can prevent that kind of stalling that you see sometimes at the beginning, that usually makes everyone a lot happier. Obviously, you have happy sales and success teams if those customers are adopting the way you want them to.
Jason, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, as it relates to CS, like, I'm not so sure about personalization, but I've definitely learned a lot through our journey. So when you're early on, it's like you have the founders working really closely with a handful of customers, and everything is kind of rosy. And ultimately, like, that's not a scalable thing. So you have to build out a customer success organization. You have to build out support. You have to build out all these different automated mechanisms to make sure that the needs of your customers are met. But this past year, I've been making an effort to sort of dive back into the early days where it's like we have Slack channels with our customers, making sure we have tons of interactions with them directly. And that sounds really obvious, but I think it's so important. And like the things that you learn through that are absolutely huge. I think that the other thing that where companies might make a mistake is also, again, sounds obvious, but like the one thing that I'd give a slap on the wrist for to like a CSM or anyone that's managing a customer is not taking very, very detailed notes, because before you know it, like, you're going to have a whole bunch of customers, hopefully, and you don't want to go to your customer and then be repeating things that you've already asked or that they've already mentioned to you. So keeping really good track of what the customer has requested of you, what the issues are, when you solve them. I think making sure that you're recording all of that. And that might not just mean like having gong recordings, but making sure that you're taking very detailed, easy to digest notes, especially if you're handing off that account to someone else. I think that's where like the personalization can really go down the tubes. Is, you hand it off and they essentially have to start over with a new CSM, and they don't have any context on the account. So I think those are some of the things to make sure that they have like a personalized experience on the CS side. But it gets trickier the bigger that you get, and I think we're still learning there.
Yeah, no, we're definitely experiencing the same thing. I think with a lot of the turnover that we're seeing in the market today, that data becomes so important for the next person up that's managing the responsibility on the customer side, and being able to kind of pick up right where you left off, or if there's some sort of period, Jason, like you said, where they're not successful and they bring someone else on board, and having to basically go through a new sales cycle mid-contract and having to get them successful. I think a lot of those things are definitely, Jason, back to your point, back to the fundamentals and just providing a good experience. Small anecdote, I was on X the other day, and I saw a customer for Slack having an issue, like exporting their data. And Benioff himself hopped in and was like, hey, email me, we'll get this taken care of. And it was kind of humbling in the sense that, like, if the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar company can hop into a Twitter thread and be personable with their customer base, there's no excuse for people like us to do the same thing. So I really like that point. So one of the lenses on this customer piece, and even on the new business side, that I think is really interesting is, I think personalization has different lenses depending on how detailed you're getting on the different customer segments. When you think about segmenting your customer base, what kind of experiences you can provide for them from a personalization standpoint, whether you've got a mass market SMB or just a handful of enterprises that you sell to. How do you think about what part of your strategy might change depending on which segment you're targeting, either pre or post sales?
I can go first. So,
yeah.
So one of the things we did recently during our sales kickoff for our SDR team in particular is we brought in myself, our VP of marketing, our VP of sales, all of these different personas that we sell to that we have within our own company, and then effectively interviewed them and said, if someone's reaching out to you, if someone's selling to you, what are your pain points? What are the things you're experiencing right now? Because I think especially not just SDRs, but newer sales reps in the first 5 years of their career, they're not exposed to the politics, to how things typically work within management in a company. And most sales campaigns, they're middle out. You're selling to a manager or director level person. And if you're an SDR and then you got promoted to an AE, like there's a lot of things that, you know, maybe we take for granted that they don't understand or they don't know. And the politics of going and asking for budget and what they're trying to do to get promoted. And so I think giving sales reps exposure to other departments and people in different levels of the chain, like how I think about things is probably very different than someone who's in middle management or frontline management, for example. So I think that type of education can add to personalization, because when they reach out, like they'll get the sense that this person like knows what they're talking about. Like if you're talking to a frontline leader, like they probably don't hold the keys to the budget. If you're asking them to buy something, they're going to look at you a little bit funny. Just things like little subtle things like that I think is great for training. That's it, Jay.
Yeah, I think I was thinking about this from the perspective of like an SMB customer versus more like a mid-market enterprise, and kind of the level of personalization that you can have depending on the size of the account. It might be the dollar value, but also just the amount of people that you're working with. You know, we've got plenty of SMB customers that want a lot of the high touch, but it's really hard for us to deliver that, right? So how do we enable that, what feels like a more personalized approach, but something that we can scale across a lot of SMB customers? Versus we've got plenty of SMB customers that are like, we never want to talk to you. We're completely fine. We want all of the self-serve. They don't want that personalization. They're very busy, right? They're managing a lot of things themselves. Versus mid-market enterprise, and sometimes it's the flip, right? Where we know that they need that personalized attention and approach because we know the problems that they're going to run into as they think about scaling. Sometimes they want that, sometimes they don't want that. So I think it's how do you match what the customer wants? Sometimes whether they realize they want it or need it or not, and make sure that you can deliver that value.
Excellent. Well, gentlemen, we're running up on time here. Last question. Key takeaways for today. Jason, I'll let you go first, and then Jay, pass it over to you after that.
Yeah, I think we touched on a few things in this conversation. I would say that there's definitely a trend of this like back to basics that like, and to what Jay was saying, you know, in terms of being like replaced by technology, and the fact that like you have to really rise above that in order to stay relevant. Example I use is like, you know, in the early days of the internet, people said salespeople will be obsolete because you can find out everything you need to know about the product online. What do they need a salesperson for? So that just means you have to be extra sharp. You have to really be an expert on your product. You have to let your personality shine through, because people want to have a relationship with a person at the company, because there's so much great automation out there today. And I think the other, you know, key point we talked about was that, you know, a lot of the traditional quote personalization has really been phased out. I think people have sort of caught on to that ruse of, you found out where I went to college and all of that. And we have to be smarter about the way that we're approaching this as salespeople to stay relevant. So that's my thoughts.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think one of the things that stuck with me that Jason said, I think at the very beginning, was around personality, right? When you think about like a cold call, it's not necessarily trying to deliver, this is what my company does, but it's, you feel that human touch. And I think like we're kind of starting to see that turn the corner of like, we're now inundated with AI everywhere, that people are craving human touch again. And how do you think about the right way to communicate with your customers where, for one, it's clear that you're actually talking with a human, because a lot of times you really can't tell anymore. So making it clear that, yes, you're building that really personalized human interaction, but also using that where it's needed. So like, I think there's times where you can overdo that, or, you know, really use it in the wrong ways. And I think the key is to have that human touch kind of layered in to all of your different playbooks, your go-to-market motion, all of the different tactics you're taking in the right ways.
Awesome. Well, Jason, Jay, thank you so much for the time today. Great insights from two excellent industry leaders. So much appreciated. And to the audience, thank you for your time as well. We hope you found this valuable. And I can personally vouch for both Orem and Toriel. If you're looking for any products in both of those spaces, I would highly recommend you consider both of them. Otherwise, we hope you have a great rest of the MSP event. And thank you for the time today.
Thanks, Jack. Thanks, Jay.
Appreciate it. Thanks, guys.